Cool. Okay, well, we have 21 people, and I am going to start the introduction now. My name is Olivia Devereaux. I'm a member of the Four Season Garden Club. Unfortunately, neither Jim nor Dan could be with us today, but this meeting is being recorded, so they are eagerly looking forward to listening to it, watching it later on. It will be posted to the groups.io site, and you can download it from there and then play it. You can't just click play, you have to download it first, but I think most people can figure that out. Our speaker today is Brie Arthur. Brie, if you do not already know, is a best-selling author and horticulturalist. She has garnered acclaim for her enthusiastic presentations, as you can already gotten a taste of that, and her practical out-of-the-box gardening advice. She's originally from southeastern Michigan and studied landscape design and hort at Purdue University. She has more than a decade of experience as both a grower and a propagator, and shares her experience as an advocate for consumer horticulture and home gardening across America. Brie is also an ambassador for Soil3 Organic Compost, appeared as a correspondent on the PBS TV show Growing a Greener World, is president of the International Plant Propagator Society Southern Region, and is on the board for the North Carolina Botanic Garden Foundation. She was honored as the first recipient of the American Horticultural Society's Emerging Horticultural Professional Award for her efforts in connecting a new generation to the art of growing. In her second book, Gardening with Grains, which is published by St. Lynn's Press, Brie explores the opportunities in residential and commercial landscapes with creative and thoughtful uses for traditional agricultural crops. Tonight, she will be talking not about the grains, but her talk is entitled The Traveling Tree Hugger, and she's going to give us a photographic tale of book tour adventures across the United States. She has visited more than 500 venues, discovered some of the best public gardens in America as part of her book, preparing for the book that she published. And we're going to go from coast to coast and zone to zone in this exciting program that will be a visual delight, and it will encourage all of us to plan a post-corona trip and hug a tree. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And Brie, I will mute myself and turn it over to you to begin the talk.
Well, thank you so much. That was such a nice intro. I'm so excited to get to speak to you all again. The last time was a really long time ago. I think it was maybe 2014 or 2015. We were at Barbara Katz's house, and I gave you a really nerdy talk, I think, on maybe winter interest plants or cold hardy camellias. Both are things I'm still very passionate about. The last few years have been really an exciting adventure outside of the nursery business, getting to travel and really help educate people on why gardening is great and give them some creative ideas of how they can make the most of the land that they are stewarding. So I'm very excited to give this talk because I think we all need kind of an escape from our everyday for the past 10 months of being stuck in pandemic life. So this is a really fun, not too intense program. Now I just have to figure out, there we go, how to advance my slides. But my name is Brie, like the cheese, Arthur like the golden girl, and I am based in Raleigh, North Carolina now. I would have gotten to 48 states if my book tour hadn't been canceled starting in March. And, you know, it's been a big goal to try and get to all 50 states. It's a little difficult because there's not a lot going on in Montana and like Wyoming as far as like public gardens and even master gardener groups. So I haven't been able to figure out how to get into those two states. If anybody has ideas, just let me know. I'm hoping that I'll be able to get back on the road maybe in 2022. But I'm really grateful for all the adventures I've had. My background really is in ornamental plant production, and I had the opportunity to come to North Carolina originally to work for Nancy Goodwin at Montrose, and from there went on to be the production manager at Plant Delights, and most recently was the propagator and grower at Camellia Forest. So my background is definitely in not normal plants, plant nerdy things, more what I like to think are more interesting than the stuff that you'll find at, you know, Lowe's and Home Depot. So it's been an interesting time as my hobby as a home gardener, specifically with regard to my approach to growing vegetables in the landscape, has overcome my, you know, formal career as a propagator and grower. But it's been a really neat experience. So I wanted to start in Raleigh, and I wanted to start in real time because, you know, I haven't been able to get to very many gardens since the pandemic hit. In fact, the Ralston Arboretum closed in March and they remain closed. But I just got permission this week to go there to film for a new YouTube channel that I'm starting with another local horticulturalist. And the garden channel is called No Rules Gardening. And we're on the website, norulesgardening.com. It's on Facebook, it's on Instagram, and it's on YouTube. And we hope to launch our first video from the Ralston Arboretum on Sunday. So you can subscribe if you want to see what we created this week. We're focusing right now on garden tours, primarily focusing on winter interest. We get to go back tomorrow, which I'm really excited about. I can't even describe how excited I am. So here are some things that were really looking good on Tuesday when I was at the Ralston Arboretum. The Daphnes are about to bloom. The Chimonanthus praecox luteus was in full flower. And what I really noticed about that plant versus the Chimonanthus or the winter sweets that weren't a cultivar form, the non-cultivar forms were still holding their foliage. So it was difficult to see the flowers. So that was for me a real reason why having a variety like luteus is such a bonus. They're relatively difficult to produce. So if you do find it, don't hesitate, just buy it. But the aspidistra this week are what really stood out to me. And the Ralston Arboretum, frankly, they have one of the best plant collections in the United States. But they certainly reign supreme as far as their Asian collections. And of course, aspidistras are from Southeast Asia. And I really just started to take note and realize I don't have a single aspidistra in my home landscape, and I have got to remedy that. So look out, nurseries, I'll be coming. Now, a year ago at this time, before the pandemic, when we were having a record-breaking warm spring, all of the Prunus mumes at the Ralston Arboretum were in full flower. And they aren't in bloom now at all. Like, they're barely even in bud. It's amazing how different one year from the next can be. We were able to go. I have two really awesome neighbor kids that help me in the garden and also help me with technology. And they love to go garden hopping. And so we took some time last year to be able to visit all of our public gardens in the area. And there was so much a year ago that was blooming that just isn't blooming yet, which is fine, because then that gives me something to look forward to in February and March. But you know, I was actually a little let down this year because I was like, I've been living through memories, you know, on my telephone since the pandemic, and there was hardly anything blooming right now. Now, another garden in our local area in the triangle of North Carolina is Duke Gardens in Durham, North Carolina. And Duke remains closed as well. Both J.C. Ralston and Duke are closed with no open date set. Because all of our public gardens are tied to the universities, they have different regulations than a normal public garden would. So, you know, it'll be up to the hierarchy of the university to determine when they'll actually come back to be available for attendees. One garden that is open in our area is the North Carolina Botanical Garden, which is a part of UNC Chapel Hill. And we were all so surprised that they opened first. They opened back in August. And you know, considering they're like the school that has a really big public health department and they kind of dropped the ball on public health with regard to like bringing students back on campus, and then they spread the virus everywhere and then they closed down again. But I was really happy that they've kept the garden open, because it's amazing, you know, just the psychological impact of being able to go and walk somewhere. Now, the North Carolina Botanical Garden is a conservation garden. It's exclusively Southeast natives. It's an interesting space in that you can really learn a lot about your natural ecosystems. And they have an incredible, I think, the best collection of Sarracenias, but really all carnivorous plants. Their Sarracenia collection is truly remarkable. So if you've never visited the Raleigh area, these would be three of the gardens that I would highly recommend putting on your list. And if you are down here and would like to head a little bit south, you could go to Fayetteville and visit the Cape Fear Botanical Garden, which is currently open. We filmed there for No Rules Gardening 2 weeks ago. We filmed at the UNC Botanical Garden, or NC Botanic Garden, also 2 weeks ago. So all of these behind the scenes videos will be available on YouTube very soon. The thing that's so special about the Cape Fear Botanic Garden to me is that they have the best camellia collection, frankly, in all of North Carolina. The Cumberland County Camellia Society maintains it, and they have almost 400 different varieties, and they're really well established. The space devoted to camellias is almost 7 acres. So it's a really substantial amount of area that the plants are well spaced and you can walk all the way around them. And they're just starting to really get kicking into flower. These are some that were blooming 2 weeks ago when we were there. Gosh, you like that one on the bottom right? That's October Affair. Isn't that awesome? So I want to now go to where I started my book tour, and I debuted my first book, The Foodscape Revolution, at the Philadelphia Flower Show in March of 2017. And that was just a really special place to be able to, you know, have a book come out. They have a wonderful bookstore, and tens of thousands of people come through and visit that garden, or those garden displays. That year the theme was Holland. And so you can imagine there were a lot of tulips, but there were also a lot of other really creative displays. Like if you've ever been to the Netherlands, you'll know that you probably won't get hit by a car, but you might get hit by a bicycle, because everybody bikes. And you know, I loved this display because it was very accurate for what being in Amsterdam feels like. Um, you know, the Philadelphia Flower Show is such a spectacle, and sometimes people are critical of it because, yeah, it's not real. I don't think it's supposed to be real, right? It's supposed to be an escape and an inspiration, and you know, all of these plants are forced, and no part of this is a literal translation to what you would do in your home garden. I think that it can be appreciated for that unique attribute. Though there were a lot of gardens that did start to embrace more of this like new naturalism movement, or kind of the integration of a lot of American native plants. That's the Pete Oldoff inspiration. So it was just really neat to see, you know, how all of these concepts of the modern landscape can come together in a relatively small amount of square footage and provide you ideas for, you know, what you might want to do in a new area of your garden. My favorite display was from my friend Carrie. Carrie did a really amazing ephemeral bulb display, which these are pretty common. These are like native Dutch bulbs, and this is how their lawns look in the spring. And her display was just, I thought, really magnificent. It did feel a little more like, gosh, you know, that's what I want my lawn to look like. And that's my good friend Erin Weston, who came with me to help me navigate the book debut. And she also helped Carrie do some really exquisite flower arrangements. And it was just a really wonderful time with some of my good girlfriends. Now, I'm a wheat person. I can't help it. I was really excited to see that there was so many displays that had grains incorporated. And I'll be honest, I didn't really associate Holland with grains, but I'm always excited to see wheat. Now, if you didn't get the notice, the Philly Flower Show is going to be outside for the first time. So that's different. I don't know all the specifics. I just wanted to let you all know if you wanted to take a trip to Philly, it's going to be the 5th through the 13th this summer in FDR Park. I I'm on a Hort happy hour usually every Thursday night, but not tonight. And some of the people that are on that are actually involved in the planning and like work for PHS. So I've been kind of getting some of the insider scoops, but they haven't really figured out all the logistics for like where will you park and how will you get there. But I think that it's a good thing to still support, and knowing that it'd be outside and in the summer makes me feel a little bit safer that you could go and remain far enough apart from people. Okay, so one of the other really big highlights of my early days of the book tour was getting to be a keynote speaker at the Epcot Flower and Garden Festival. And that was like along with P. Allen Smith and I think Martha Stewart was there one weekend. Like it was a really big deal. And it didn't make sense that they asked me, but I was so excited. Maybe they needed a fangirl because I fulfilled that role really well. The if you've not been to Epcot, it's worth going just to look at the plants. I'm not a huge Disney person, but I think they do an incredible job with their grounds maintenance. And especially for me, having a passion for foodscaping, Epcot does it better than anyone, like 1,000 times better than me. And what's really remarkable is that at Epcot, they grow all this food and they harvest it and they use it in their restaurants on all the Disney parks. So it's not just for show, it really is for real. So whenever I have a landscaper, tell me that foodscaping isn't possible, I'm like, yeah, well, you probably don't have 10,000 people a day walking through that random residential landscape. So I think there is a way to make this possible. So one of the things I really like about Epcot is they have the best signage. Epcot is really all about an educational experience, and the information that they share about horticulture is extremely valuable. I would venture to say that 99% of Americans would not be able to identify a coffee plant. Hell, they probably wouldn't even be able to identify a coffee plant with the sign that is describing what coffee is next to it, right? But this is the first step. And a lot of not garden people go through these parks, and if a little of this information wears off, that's good, because we need people to understand, where food comes from and how you can grow it. And ultimately, we need them to care about, getting a vaccine so that we can all get back to life. And here Disney's showing you exactly how a vaccine is made. They had a lot more signs relating to this in their medicinal garden, which was done both beautifully but also very practically as an education tool. And I showed you that picture of the garden that Carrie designed, and this is kind of the Florida equivalent. And this was actually part of their Florida Waterwise program. So this is an unirrigated space that's still beautifully flowering. And that was showing people how to properly prep their soil. So moving on to New York City, before the books, I never went to New York City. I didn't have a lot of interest. I get intimidated by big urban places, but the book tour brought me there, 6, 7, 8 times, quite a few different times, quite a few different weather systems that I've experienced in different trips to New York. Some of my favorite gardens just to walk through. I love Central Park. I love Central Park Conservatory. Domino Park in Brooklyn is pretty interesting. My good friend actually is the one who introduced this Everillo Carex. And when I sent him this picture, he just like freaked out because he was so excited. He's like, wow, that's where all my royalty money is coming from. It was so much of the same plant. I was a little horrified, I'm not gonna lie. But this was in the middle of November. This is like the week before Thanksgiving, and it still looks good. It shows up, it's evergreen. I think maybe they could have balanced it with a few other different types of plants, but I'm not the designer here. I've had the opportunity to do a number of projects with NYU, including planting grains on their rooftop gardens. And not just grains, we did a number of different vegetables so that they could harvest those and use them in their cafeteria system. Interesting thing about New York is that you don't really want to grow food on the ground plane because there's too many rats. Nobody really wants to eat food that the rats have been climbing all around. I completely understand. So that was a really neat experience for me to get to understand roof gardening a little better. And higher is definitely not better as far as growing on top of a building. The higher you get, the colder it is, the windier it is, and the less pollinators that you have access to. I had the great pleasure of speaking at the New York Botanic Garden, and it was in the middle of July. It was actually for their horticulture intern program. And I was going through my pictures and I'm like, I hardly took any pictures of plants. And that's because the Chihuly exhibit was there and all of my pictures are devoted to glass. So I'm sorry, but it was beautiful. It was truly, truly exquisite. If you haven't gotten to see a Chihuly exhibit in person, I do recommend visiting a garden. It just makes so much sense. Oh my God, I'm losing my language. It makes so much sense when you have it in the context of a garden, and they're very thoughtful with their placement. Another garden that I love to visit in New York is Wave Hill, and just the views alone from Wave Hill kind of take you to a different time, or it's just you just feel like a very different pace. It's such a lovely garden. It's very diverse. I thought they were doing a lot of really interesting things with succulents, both growing vertically and in different containers. And they overwinter all of these plants. And I was lucky enough to have a VIP tour with the current director, Louis Bauer, and the original owner, Stefano. So that was a really exciting trip. Of course, you can't go to New York and not hang out at the High Line. And I really do recommend visiting the High Line as often as possible and in every season, because it looks dramatically different and it changes a lot from year to year. So it's really kind of a neat experiment to see which plants overwhelm other plants. And even though it kind of, I think people think this look doesn't require maintenance, it actually requires a lot of maintenance. So, no one should ever discount the amount of effort that goes into maintaining this public park that is the most visited site in New York City. So I was really captivated, obviously, with Orangium or Rattlesnake Master and the Echinacea combos. Neither of those plants do exceptionally well here where I am in South Raleigh. Have really, really high water table, so they kind of struggle with wet feet, but I love to see it there. And then this is some different shots of the High Line in the fall, and it has a completely different look. This day was really cold. It was probably like 25 degrees, so there was almost no one walking on it. That's a good day to go. You can get pictures without people.
Hey,
So
Brie.
also, yes.
Sorry. About the High Line, does that dry out? I mean, do they have to water that because it's above the ground?
So they do. I think the whole thing is fully irrigated, and then they also do spot hand watering. And what's interesting, because it's a bridge, it's an old railway, they did a really good job at the beginning establishing different soil types. So like where they have birches, they actually have like a peat-based soil so it stays wetter, versus the areas where they're growing, echinaceas and rudbeckias and ornamental grasses, that actually has more of like a natural compost mix with permatil mixed into it. But then they had to do a lot because, you know, of weight. So I mean, obviously they did a really good job shoring it up, but they also had to incorporate a lot of like soilless materials. And so I don't know all the stuff that they used exactly, but I know they were explaining to me that like each zone, as Pete was designing it, each zone of plants essentially had a different soil mix that would allow for either greater water retention or better drainage. And then it's also has a different irrigation system.
Great.
So it's pretty complicated. You know, I would think that maintaining the irrigation system would be probably a single full-time job.
I bet. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So if you've not had the chance to go up to Buffalo, highly recommend it. Buffalo is actually really awesome. And the Buffalo Garden Walk is truly spectacular. There's like 300 gardens, all walking distance in these neighborhoods that are open to the public that you can just stroll through at your own pace. And it's just a lovely experience. The nice thing about Buffalo too is there's several houses from Frank Lloyd Wright, and it's a lovely town. You know, a lot of these sort of older, sort of in the Rust Belt area, have these cities have had a great renaissance. I mean, I don't know, maybe not right now in COVID, but pre-COVID, with great restaurants and a lot of improvements to the infrastructure to be able to, you know, accommodate tourists, so to speak. I don't recommend Buffalo now. I think go to Buffalo in July or August when it's hot in the mid-Atlantic and it's not unbearable up there. That's my rule of thumb. Okay, so cutting over to the middle of the country. And you know, a trip to Denver is basically like a trip to Never Never Land, because everything that they grow there, none of that translates to the East Coast. So go to Denver knowing that you are going to be jealous the entire time that you're there, that you're going to go through their rock garden and you're going to want to recreate it, and you will fail because we get like 20 times the amount of rain that Denver gets. Okay, it's not you, it's the region. But I have to remind myself of this every time I go to Denver because I want that, right? I want Perovskia. Yeah, you know what? Perovskia lives like 20 minutes in Raleigh, North Carolina. Just because I want it doesn't mean I can have it. So I go to Denver and I just think, oh my gosh, what a magnificent place. And if you haven't been, you definitely need to put it on your to-do list. I do believe that Denver Botanic Garden is the best botanical garden in the United States. They don't say that lightly. It is the most horticulturally significant. I think they just have one of the most talented staff. And in that picture on the left, I don't know if you recognize him, but that's Joseph Tykanovich. And if you haven't had Joseph speak to your group, he's a little bit shy, but you should have him. He has a new book out, so you should tell him that Brie told you that he has to speak for you.
We've had him. Yes.
Okay, you have. All right, good. Joseph
Yep.
is awesome. I was like, and he's in Virginia, you know. So some more like echinops. You know, again, echinops don't do well for me. I grew up with echinops in Michigan. That was the first thing I ever entered into the county fair. Here, they don't live very long, but you know, there's just nothing. There's never a moment at the Denver Botanic Garden that isn't worth taking a photograph of. Y'all ever seen this moon carrot? I had never seen it before. I of course bought seed, and all of it died like the first day that our night temperatures were, you know, over 80 degrees. But I tried anyhow. You know, I mean, look at these echinaceas in the trial garden at you know, or is it Colorado State, I think. I mean, gosh, look at, even the kids were excited about those. That's the Kismet series of echinacea. Going out to the West Coast into Seattle, some more Chihuly. Actually, the only garden that I have seen in Seattle is the Chihuly Garden. Go figure. I haven't spent a lot of time in Seattle, and often when I'm on this book tour, I'm in and out, and most of my time is devoted to the organization that's hired me. So I don't get to actually take a vacation in every one of these venues. It's frequently one day here, one day there, and it's a little bit of a hectic schedule. The Chihuly Garden is really amazing, and it was originally designed by oh my God, his name just escaped me. Oh, you guys know who I'm talking about? Oh, oh, he was from NC State. He studied under JC. Oh God, that's gonna drive me crazy. I'm sorry. It'll come to me and I'll shout it out. It won't make sense. But he's an East Coast native, and it's a real planted garden. You know, a lot of times in a garden, when they put Chihuly exhibits in, it's more about the glass than it is about the plants. And in the Chihuly garden, it truly was, the plants were selected first, and then the glass was blown to be a complement to the horticulture. And I think that's a really remarkable thing to experience. And it's beautiful inside and out. This is where the museum is. It's sort of at the base of the Sky Needle. Down to Oregon, I wanted to throw in this winery. This was designed by Sean Hogan, owner of Sistis Nursery. And this was one of the most fabulous winery landscapes that I've ever seen. It's not really that big, but it is just extraordinary. And they make really good sparkling. So I highly recommend Argyle. But then also the Chinese garden in Portland is a magnificent site. I had the chance to spend an afternoon here. We had tea, and it's just a very relaxing experience with very, very well tended specimen plants. Now, my second favorite garden in the United States is in Des Moines. And that would be the Greater Des Moines Botanic Garden. Now, a big reason why that is my favorite is because my dear friend, Kelly Norris, up until recently was the director of horticulture. And he really is so talented and really, you know, presses the limits, and was really kind of driving this in a similar way as Panioti at Denver to truly be a horticultural, you know, wonderland. I don't know the direction the garden will go in now that a lot of the staff has been changed as a result of the pandemic, but I hope that they will keep their horticultural integrity. Some of the displays there, textures, colors, natives, non-natives. Kelly's really good at blurring the lines, and he had developed a really talented staff of horticulturalists. So I would still recommend getting out there as soon as possible so that you can experience this garden in its full glory. By the way, Kelly has a brand new book out called New Naturalism, and I think he just got his first copy today. So if you follow him on social media, send him a congratulations note, because it's been kind of a stressful experience for him, not just him, but for anybody writing a book in a pandemic. And I can tell you it's stressful trying to sell a book in the middle of a pandemic. Now, when I was last in Des Moines, which was last June, we went up to Ames, Iowa. I have to say, I'm completely intrigued with Iowa. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to garden. The peonies literally put me down on the floor. The hostas, they grow like shrubs. Like, this is what I remember growing up in Michigan. You could have hostas as your foundation landscape, and you know, they would get 2.5, 3 foot tall every summer. Beautiful displays, you know, with different salvias and ornamental grasses, and incredible collections of different flowering alliums. Now, also in the Midwest, Tulsa Botanic Garden, which is in its infancy and has also had a major change up in its infrastructure, and that the original director and president, Todd Lassane, has now moved to Bellingrath down in Mobile. And they have not replaced Todd yet at the Tulsa Botanic Garden. But I had the good fortune of getting to visit there. And even though it's like only 10 years old, they have done a wonderful job creating gardens with massive infrastructure. I think that Oklahoma is trying to compete with Texas for making everything bigger. And Todd was certainly succeeding with that at this garden. Now, down to the East Coast, the Atlanta Botanical Garden, that's always a joy to see. And I forgot to add some of the pictures of the light display there, but they do a great light display. This was there. Also, I was there. I visited a lot of gardens that simultaneously had Chihuly in them. So this was in August of a couple of years ago. And, you know, even though I feel like I've seen a lot of this glass in every garden does it a little differently. And so it doesn't really get boring.
Hey,
This
Brie.
one,
Sorry.
yes.
Sorry, finish your thought on this. I have a question about the Tulsa when you're.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I would say this is actually, you know, the Atlanta Botanic Garden is really known for bringing in these huge, like, international artists to do these big displays. And so, like, Chihuly is just one of an exhibit that, you know, goes from garden to garden. And there was another exhibit a few years ago with these giant topiary creatures. And this is Gaia Goddess. That was the one that Atlanta bought from the artists, and they continue to maintain. Now, what about Tulsa?
Sure. In that picture, with all the hardscaping, the first, yes, that
Yeah.
one. Are those slender silhouettes there?
They are
Okay.
slender silhouettes.
Thank you. All right.
You're welcome. And I'll tell you, Todd was constantly fighting. They have really alkaline soil there, like 9. You know, it's a crazy pH to grow plants in. And so that all of that structure, that's all artificial. That there is no slope there. That was all brought in and created under Todd.
Wow.
And I can't believe I didn't include pictures of the children's garden, because you should see this insane, like, dragon thing that they have in their children's garden. It was
Wow.
really over the top.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So Brie, what is the underlying geology that makes the pH so high? Or is it just a salty soil, or what is
I
it?
guess, like, it's that same soil that, like, runs through North Texas that makes, like, not only is their soil really high, but they have really high water pH. So even if you, like, try and fix your soil by adding pine bark or whatever, once you water it, the pH goes right back up. So it's really strange. Yeah, it's really very, very odd. I have never lived with alkaline soil, so I actually don't know the first thing about growing in that condition. But I know that Todd had a really extensive water filtration system put in, so that when they watered, the water was neutral. And that was a really important point, because basically everything gets chlorotic, because so many macronutrients won't be available to plants when the pH is over 8. So yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. I'm not planning any moves to alkaline areas, you know. Now, one of my favorite gardens in the Southeast is the Coastal Georgia Botanical Garden. And I think this garden just has so much potential. It's really interesting because it's been around for a long time. It was actually established by David Fairchild, and they were trialing bamboo for hardiness. And so, you know, it was through USDA. And I think really it's only been within the last 15 or 20 years that it became less extension focused and more public garden. And they happen to have a really amazing camellia collection. Now, their camellia collection is zone 9. So again, you're not going there to see a literal interpretation of what you would do in the mid-Atlantic. It's not even relevant for here in Raleigh. It's just more to enjoy camellias in a nearly frost-free climate. They have really cool displays though. You know, they are real zone 9. So they grow a lot of citrus that's hardy. They grow a ton of really interesting succulents, including agaves. Moving just up a little bit to Charleston, South Carolina. These are two of my favorite gardeners in Charleston. Um, Javier has like the best collection of bromeliads. I think he has something like 25,000 in his garden, and most are not hardy. So when Charleston gets, you know, like down to say 25 degrees or something, he has to actually go out with covers and heaters and actually protect everything. So it's a real it's a significant love. These are some other shots from his home garden. It's the most extraordinary home garden that I've ever seen. It's difficult to even put words to it. It's so amazing. Another garden that's near and dear to my heart is Magnolia Plantation, and I know that in this era, like celebrating a plantation is sort of weird. But you know what I think is cool about Magnolia is that they've been acknowledging the reality of their heritage for a long time, and they educate people about, you know, what happened during the Civil War and what life was like, and because they don't want to see that repeated. And I think that we can't erase that history. It's really important that new generations are aware of that part of American history, and Magnolia does a good job of acknowledging that. Magnolia is known for all of their bridges, which are over top of low-lying water filled with alligators. And alligators will frequently just lounge across the walkways and not move, and you just have to turn around and go the other way because they can eat you. They have magnificent old live oaks. You know, it's everything that Charleston is about. I used to go to Magnolia and collect cuttings of camellias because they have an incredible heritage collection, all varieties pre-1900, and they're all labeled. And my husband used to come along with me. We actually got engaged during one of those cuttings trips. We ended up getting married at Magnolia. So for us, it really has a lot of meaning, and I really value and appreciate their plant collection. Now, a new garden to the south, and one that is well worth a visit, even though it seems like it's in the middle of nowhere, because it is. Lake City, South Carolina is like 30 miles east of Florence. And honest to God, it's the hottest place I've ever been in my whole life. It's the lowest point in South Carolina, even though it's not on the coast. And it is so flat that it makes the Midwest seem like a mountain range. But it is the coolest garden ever. It's funded and built by a billionaire. She was an investment banker, I think. Made it big a couple of different times, a couple of different ways, moved back to where she was from, Lake City, developed this amazing garden on her family's old tobacco fields. And what we're standing in front of is what I would consider to be the best live wall in America. And that is adjacent to what I consider to be the best live roof in America. And we could learn a lot from the engineering that they did here. Now, the difference is they built this with the intention of this infrastructure. They weren't trying to, you know, fit a building that already existed. But this is something that new buildings should absolutely have because it's so efficient and it's so interesting. So these are some shots of the live roof. And it kind of looks like a golf course, doesn't it? They have mown areas where their staff goes up with a little reel lawnmower and mows patches of Bermuda grass to give it that texture. And they've got, you know, full-size agaves and, you know, ephemeral bulbs through the spring. And they have crinums up there blooming in the summertime and all kinds of interesting native herbaceous plants and different yuccas. So this to me is truly the shining example. Words do not do it justice. It's well worth Googling Moore Farms Botanical Garden. There again is the building, that is their facilities building. So that's where they have offices for staff and where they have their mechanic shop and, you know, where they store different equipment. And, you know, every garden has a building like this, but not every building is as interesting and horticulturally relevant as this one. There's a lot about Moore Farms that makes you feel like you've been transported to a different continent, including this Bali house. Because Darla Moore has been able to travel the world and stay where billionaires hang out, she has recreated some of these scenes at this facility that when you're there and you get to, you know, take a few minutes to soak it in, it stays with you. And this is actually designed to capture even the smallest breeze, and you just move those shutters and it'll direct the airflow. So even on the hottest day in the summer, you will still, you know, feel refreshed when you're sitting in this hut. One of the features that I love best about Moore Farms is this two different types of grass that are grown together in the formation of a giant tobacco leaf, because that is paying homage to what this land used to be. And your best view of it is from this giant fire tower that no one in their right mind would want to walk up. Now, while you're at Moore Farms, you are just a few miles away from Pearl Friar, the famous topiarian. And you'll know that you're getting close because even the Waffle House at the exit on 95 has Pearl's work at it, and it's amazing. Now, I know that Pearl is getting older and time is of the essence to see his work. Hopefully, all of that will be preserved long term. Here's just a few of the crazy things that he has in his home garden. And it's a big space. It's several acres. And, you know, he started off just buying like throwaway shrubs from Home Depot and just cutting them into weird shapes. And he's just an extraordinary person, very kind and fun to hang out with. Now, coming up along the East Coast, I've had the chance to speak at the Heritage Harvest Festival several times, and once even with, oh my gosh, Louise Waters. I was like starstruck beyond contemplation. It was crazy. That was really amazing. Monticello for me is a really important inspiration because I really am interested in, you know, how food was produced in small scales in older time, and then how can I take inspiration from that and reflect that in the modern residential landscape. And Thomas Jefferson was really, you know, pressing the limits for growing plants, and he's to be thanked for the introduction of a great many number of wonderful ornamental and edibles. Now, coming back up to Philadelphia, I go to Philadelphia a lot. I feel very fortunate to have that experience. I have a lot of friends who work in gardens in the Philly area. Of course, Mount Cuba is not in Philly, but like I consider it all the same area. So Mount Cuba, just so you know, just came out with their trials information. So you can get all the details on what plants did best in the trials from last summer. Winterthur is a garden that I had never been to before, and we actually went there for my neighbor Abby's 10th birthday, and it was a pretty magical experience. So I was like, man, I went bowling for my 10th birthday. You know, she got to go garden hopping for like 3 days. But we were just mystified by Winterthur. We also got to see the Crown costume display while we were there, and that was pretty cool. Now, Chanticleer. The reason that I say Denver is the best public garden is because I consider Chanticleer to not totally be a public garden, even though it is. I just kind of consider Chanticleer to be in a league of its own, and it's hands down my favorite garden that I've ever been to. Partly because what they do is translatable, even though they do it on a grand scale. For those of us in the East Coast, we can take what they do and apply it to our gardens. And that's what I really love and appreciate about visiting Chanticleer. So just some of the beautiful scenes from my most recent visit there. That was back in mid-September. And then here is from Abby's birthday trip again. Her favorite spot of the garden was the ruins, which is always an extraordinary place. Going there at every season, I think, is really important. I got to spend my 40th birthday at Chanticleer, and that was one to remember, 100%. All of the bulbs, and it was like mild and warm, because sometimes Philly can be cold in early April, but I was really fortunate that year. Everything was activated and green and growing. All of the cherries were in bloom, all of the magnolias were in flower, and this was the day before the magic moment at Longwood that I'm going to get to in a minute, but you can see how the blossoms are just starting to coat the ground. And then getting into Longwood, and I love these fountains. I don't care if they're tacky. I think they're super entertaining. And Abby really had a good time going to these fountains. That was actually what she asked for her 10th birthday, was to go to see the Longwood fountains, because she follows them on Instagram. If you want to know how to get to the next generation, that's precisely how it's going to be, especially now that everything they do, including school, is digital. And we were lucky enough to have my good friend Matt Ross be our guide while we were at Longwood, and we got to go to a lot of different behind the scenes areas. So Abby has really high expectations for how she's going to get treated when she visits gardens now. And now here are some scenes from that magic day. It'll be April 2 years ago at Longwood. We just basically sat on the ground and watched in awe for over an hour as we saw these petals just fall down. It was really kind of otherworldly. And not only that, but all the coralists were in bloom, and the forsythias, and all of the tulips. It's just a great time to go and visit the Philadelphia area gardens. Now, my last garden for all of you is Coastal Maine Botanical Garden. That's in Booth Bay. And I've had the great pleasure of going there several times. And I will tell you that it's still really cold in June, but it's really nice in August. So these are pictures primarily from August, because the entire time that my husband and I were there in June, it rained. We were there for the solstice. I thought it's warm everywhere for solstice, but it's not. In fact, I had to buy alpaca. I was so cold. They have beautiful displays. It's a really large garden. It's very well maintained. I think their children's garden is one of the best in the entire country. And the pollinator activity there really gave me a complex, made me think that I was a failure. I've never in my life seen more monarchs than I did in the children's garden at the Coastal Maine Botanic Garden. And especially on this liatris, it was just a frenzy. There were hundreds. It was the most remarkable experience. So these are all pictures from the children's garden. This is a great way to inspire kids to get excited about horticulture, because it's just such an interesting combination of plants and colors and textures. Of course, they grow really good produce where the days are long and the nights are cool. And I was like, oh yeah, my tomatoes don't look quite like that, but I have something to strive for. So I thank you all so much for you tuning in tonight. I hope this was a good escape. That's the main point of this program. Here I'm hugging some more trees in Maine. I do actually generally change my outfits. I think these are both from the same day. And I hope that y'all will keep in touch. I do have my YouTube channel, Brie the Plant Lady, but I'd like to encourage you, if you want to go on some garden tour escapes, to follow No Rules Gardening on YouTube. And you can tune in for some of our very first videos that will be coming out this weekend. And that was it. So I hope that y'all have a good winter season, and that maybe sooner than later we'll all be able to gather together in person and maybe visit a garden.
Brie, do you have time for questions?
I do.